This is advertising material.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for this roundtable discussion today. We're going to be having a discussion about proactive business strategies for cybersecurity. My name is Nick Landers. I am the Chief Marketing Officer for SimplifIT. We'll let everyone else introduce themselves.
My name is Craig Willard, and I'm Chief Operating Officer for SimplifIT.
My name is Bill George. I'm a senior attorney with McBrayer, McGinnis, Leslie & Kirkland, PLLC, and I specialize in healthcare, insurance, and cybersecurity work.
My name is Chad Thompson. I'm also an attorney with McBrayer, specialize in healthcare, regulatory compliance, and professional liability defense.
Very good. We're going to jump straight into some of the content here. So Craig, take it away.
Sure. First and foremost, what is cybersecurity? So oftentimes you hear this term, but we don't really know from many aspects what is cybersecurity. And it's simply put, it is the act of protecting your business internally and externally from attacks. And yes, we do have oftentimes internal attacks. And Warren Buffett even said that cybersecurity attacks are much larger than even the threat of nuclear weapons. It is the #1 problem to mankind. What do you think, from a legal perspective, what is that cybersecurity risk like?
Well, it's really interesting because paying attention to cybersecurity is absolutely essential. Cybersecurity is now here, it's going nowhere, and in fact, it runs many different businesses through various aspects. So why is paying attention to cybersecurity so important? Well, think about it as the 4 pillars. What are the 4 pillars of cybersecurity that are important to me? The first one is a continuation of your business operations, which goes into your profit. The second pillar is the integrity of your business. How can you realistically have integrity and run a company without cybersecurity protection? The third one is your financial solvency. How can you make a profit without being secure from cyber pirates? And the third one, which is extremely important, is both your civil and criminal exposure. Now, what type of companies are there in the world of cybersecurity? Well, I looked to Robert Mueller when he was the FBI director, who said that there are 2 types of companies, those who have been hacked and those who are about to be hacked.
So to add a little bit more to this, we want to talk about what's known as the laws of cybersecurity. And we'll just start with #1 being that if there is a vulnerability, someone, somewhere will plan to exploit it, and they will exploit it. And the truth is everything, absolutely everything is vulnerable. And humans trust even when they shouldn't, whether it was an email, whether it was some sort of phone conversation, humans have a tendency to trust in places where they shouldn't. And we often talk about, as a business owner and as leadership of an organization, how we can innovate our organizations, how we can do things differently than we've ever done them before. But when we do that, there is an opportunity for an added level of exploitation. And when all in doubt, always go back to see law #1, which is if there is a vulnerability, someone will exploit it. Have you ever heard of WMD? Have you ever heard of WMD?
Actually, I just heard about something about WMDs today.
What was it? What was that?
Well, we pulled out of a nuclear treaty with Russia.
Yeah. We talk about weapons of mass destruction, right?
Yes.
However, when we're talking about cybersecurity, we're talking about weapons of mass disruption. Think about what can happen if you have a cyber attack on your organization. Someone infiltrates your network and starts to wreak havoc, cause problems. It is going to disrupt the way your organization functions, and it is going to disrupt the way that you communicate and handle your clients. So, as we talked about just previously, why do we care about cybersecurity? Yes, there is an extensive loss of revenue as a potential ramification. If you have to pay a penalty, where do you think it's going to come from? It's going to come from your revenue. And then when you do have to do that, people are going to debate your reputation. Are you really worth doing business with? Is the risk worth the reward? Your business might close. So we know, as we'll talk about in the future here, 25% of all businesses, small and medium size, 25% of those will close this year due to a breach. And then you also have to think about the unscheduled downtime that goes along with that. Can you imagine, what is an hour's worth of your business time? If your network completely shuts down, what is it, just 1 hour of that time worth to you? Now, what we have to ask, are you going to be a cyber warrior? Or are you going to be a cyber warrior where you take yourself on the offense and you do everything that you can do to protect your organization, not by being a cyber warrior where you just hope that nothing happens, but you become a cyber warrior where you actually do everything you can on the offense to keep people from penetrating your organization, whether it's from infrastructure or whether that's from a form of social media or social engineering. But what we oftentimes hear, Nick, have we not heard this over and over again, is that I have nothing they want. And so what I'd like to show you is several actual clients where we did an assessment on their organization, and we found anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000 to upwards of a much larger number. But what we have here is $305,000 in risk. And what this was an assessment of an organization's infrastructure, and we found credit card numbers, social security numbers, date of birth. These are all pieces of protected information that have literally been left unprotected and open for anyone to see. But the truth is, in the last 2 weeks, we have, Nick, have we not? We have uncovered over $20 million in potential risk liability because organizations were not protecting information that maybe they didn't know it was there, or if they knew it was there, they didn't know how to protect it and they didn't know where it went. But nonetheless, if there is information on your infrastructure and your network, on your servers and your PCs that is unprotected, you are liable as an organization for that information. By average, we're talking $120,000, and this is for a small business. I mean, it can get up into the millions really quick, as we just showed you. 2 organizations, $20 million worth of risk. But on average, my question to you as a business owner, as a leader, do you have $120,000 that you can literally burn? Because essentially, if there is an incident and you have to pay, this is money that's given to someone else, and it's not revenue that you can use to better your business. So what are your options? Well, as a small to medium business, you got 2. You can either do everything you can to protect it, to become the cyber warrior of your organization, or you can do literally nothing. And if you do take care of the risk and all of the things like that, the next thing you know, all these issues outside of that will be lower. But if you literally do nothing, the risk on the outside of that will increase. So you have a choice, right? What is your choice? Your choice is I can either spend money to protect myself and have a lower amount of risk, or I can do nothing and hope, and then I have to pay on the outside from a breach, and I don't know what 10x, I don't know what it might be, but there's going to be a much higher level of expense, even from the risk, from the actual breach to the remediation to the legal fees that are caused from that. It's just a much different picture. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And in the world of compliance and the regulatory field, what we love to see on the legal side is a client who wants to be proactive, who wants to come in and say, this is my business, this is how I want to run this business, tell me if this is how I should run my business. And then that way, by spending the money on the front end, which is substantially less than having to spend money on the back end to fix a problem.
Yeah.
Because now you mentioned $120,000, that doesn't even include legal fees, I would assume.
That's correct.
And that may not even include having to make payments to individuals whose data or information was put out into the dark web for sale to the highest bidder.
That's so true. So it's much larger than even the $120,000, and that's why this is such a good conversation, because not only is it from the cybersecurity perspective of infrastructure, social engineering, but it's also the legal perspective of what else do we have to do that's outside of that. Yeah. So as we just talked about, if we do very little and we spend no money, being reactive, then there's going to be recovery and investigative, a production cost. There's going to be issues with downtime and obviously a loss of revenue. But if we really take the time and the energy to put in antivirus programs, to put in anti-spamware, web filtering, doing good backups, making sure patch management, if we do all of that stuff on the front side, we're seeing a great reduction in recovery costs and investigation costs. Production time, could you imagine? I mean, if you're doing everything you can, the likelihood of you having a downtime is going to be far less than if you do absolutely nothing.
Well, and the other thing, Craig, is that when there is unfortunately an incident and federal regulators do come in to take a look, if you've been proactive versus reactive, it's a better conversation to have with those regulators about what are the next steps. And that could help your clients, could help anybody out there, that if they do ever have an incident and they have to start explaining themselves to regulators, the regulators could take the proactive steps into consideration when assessing potential corrective action plans or fines and penalties.
So basically what you're saying is they're forgiving to those who work really hard.
In certain situations, they could be, yes.
That's very well noted. Thank you. So what do these companies have in common? And you may or may not know, but in 2018, they had a cybersecurity incident. So what does this mean for you? Well, it means everyone is susceptible. So it doesn't matter how big you are, it doesn't matter how small you are. So 97% of the businesses in America are small to medium businesses. That is the largest section of all of America in which are most vulnerable because they generally will put the least amount of resources into cybersecurity protection. And let's be honest, there's not some kid in the background who's, closed the door and he's at his parents' house and he's playing along, or he's in the basement in this cubby hole and he's just like this kid that's 28 years old and has nothing better to do. These are people that have coats and ties, they're professional, they're an entrepreneur, they're just doing this in ways which we as normal good human beings wouldn't do it. Instead of us dealing in the business that we do, they deal in the business of stealing information and reselling it for a lot more money, correct? So the question is, did you know how big the cybersecurity or the cybercrime industry is? $1.5 trillion. And that's broken down into several smaller buckets, but we have everything from illicit to illegal online markets like the dark web. We have data trading. We have theft of trade secrets and things of that nature. But you may not know this thing called crimeware as a service, and that is someone who wants to be a cyber criminal, but they don't have the ability to program things on their own. They don't have the ability to build their own systems. So they go and they rent someone else's system that's already in place, and they try to make as much money off of that as they can. And they buy that maybe by the month, or they maybe buy that by the year, but whatever it is, they are able to spend money to buy a piece of software that will do this for them. So it's not just for those who are so well involved in the programming industry. These are people that just want to steal information somehow, some way. And then, of course, you've got about 1 billion in ransomware. And statistically speaking, right now, what we're finding is anywhere between 14 and 18 seconds, every 14 and 18 seconds, someone is being hit with a ransomware attack. So statistically speaking, there are about 28 million small businesses in America. And then of those, about 50 to 60% of those will be breached. So that's about another 16.8 million businesses in America this year in 2019 that will be breached. And within about 6 months of that breach, 8.4 million, statistically speaking again, are said to close. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And what are we going to do to resolve it? So the question too, how do these even happen? People oftentimes ask, like, what is this cyber incident about and where do they come from? They come from really two main areas. One is they just walk in. They just let them in the front door. The other is they find a window that's unlocked, a door that you left unlocked. And from that, we talk about social engineering. So social engineering is where you get an email, you get a phone call, and you don't really pay a lot of attention to who it is, and all of a sudden, somebody gets let in, literally like they're opening the door. And The other one is infrastructure weakness. So this is where you're not doing firewall. If you have a firewall, maybe we're not updating it, we're not patching our devices, we're not making sure that our antivirus is up to date, or we don't have a spam filter to minimize the penetration into our email systems. These are things that cause big time issues. So breaking that down a little further, we're talking about phishing incidents. We're talking about bad websites where you got an email as a phishing attempt, and it was an Amazon email that you need to change your password. You click the button, it sends you to a website that actually wasn't an Amazon website, but looked just like it. You entered your credentials in. Next thing you know, they stole those. They sold them on the dark web for $1 or $2, and then someone else is going to take those credentials that they purchased and try to get into your Amazon account through that process. And then the other one being this infrastructure weakness. So we're talking about unpatching devices. There is this thing about making sure that patching your devices, it's the simplest thing that you can do. Of all the things that you can do, making sure that your devices are receiving the patches that are coming out is most important. But from that, also making sure that your network infrastructure, your firewalls, your switches, your routers, and things of that nature are always staying up to date, antivirus and things of that nature. And the truth be known, if we talk about infrastructure, you can strengthen up your infrastructure to like the best in the world. But if you have an individual fall to a social engineering event, it doesn't matter anymore. So while infrastructure weakness is really important to make sure that we take care of, we also have to make sure we go one step further, and that's ensuring that our employees are educated on social engineering attacks. So what I want to show you all is a really quick video. This was made from a small town, Frankfort, Kentucky. This is the capital of Kentucky, but this is a new firewall that we just put in, and we wanted to look at about a minute's worth of blocked attacks that we did on this firewall. And so I'm going to show you what a minute's worth of our blocked attacks look like. And as you'll see, they're all parts of the country, all parts of the world are actually pulling in to hit this little bitty town in Frankfort, Kentucky. And as you'll notice at the bottom right-hand corner, this is number out of attacks. 200. 300. It's showing you at the top the ports that they're hitting from. So basically what we do is we take the IP address that it's coming from, and then we're able to identify what country that's associated with.
Greg, given the ability of hackers to mask their IP addresses, where are you sort of seeing that there's a large percentage of attacks coming from across the world?
Asia is really, really, really powerful in this realm. Now, as you can, they can mask those things to some degree, but we don't see as many from inside America. It's not to say that they're not there, but we're not seeing from this perspective. We're seeing a whole lot from Middle East and from just the Asia generally. So China to Russia, all the way through. And you'll see this, this is showing a really good example of that. But anyway, what we have here is 592 hits in 1 minute. This is a brand new firewall just on the internet. So if you think that there's not traffic out there going crazy looking for it, and the way this works is people are just sending out pings. They're just looking for something that responds. And then when it responds, then they go into it a little bit deeper and they start figuring out what operating system that device is on, and are there any vulnerabilities already known about that device? Well, let me hit those vulnerabilities. If somebody didn't patch it, maybe I can get in. Next thing you know, they're into a system. But this is the real world. This is what really happens every single day. So how do we mitigate this? First and foremost, when we talk about infrastructure, appropriate access is so critically important. I can go back over here when we talk about HIPAA. So when it comes to HIPAA, it's always give people only the amount of access they need and nothing more, only the amount of access needed to do their job. So if you're in an accounting department, your access should be about the accounting department. If you are in a engineering department and you have access to accounting department stuff, if the engineer happens to get a phishing email and he clicks it and it happens to end up being ransomware and it gets out in the network, next thing you know, all of your accounting data is locked up as well. So ensuring that we have appropriate access based upon your job role is absolutely critical.
And frankly, to be honest with you, where that starts is having a command structure that understands and appreciates cybersecurity. And if your command structure adheres to the cybersecurity policies and procedures, then your employees will follow.
Correct. Yeah, the leader leads the way, right?
Absolutely. It's a tested and worked out theory.
Yeah, definitely. In the small business sector, what we see a lot of times is people will buy technology based on what they use at home, and then they'll come and bring it to their business thinking that they're as safe as they need to be. And the truth is if you own a business, you really need business-grade network infrastructure. And I'll be honest with you, nowadays, it's really important to have business-grade at home as well if you can. If you can afford it, by all means, protect yourself. But making sure that you're having a highly advanced firewall that maybe has honeypots or sandboxes, things that can help you break down any sort of potential issue, but also making sure your firewalls are up to date and that they are, if you can automate the updates, that's great, but whatever it is, make sure that you're using business-grade technology in your business environment. Vulnerability exploitation. So making sure that we have consistent operating systems. We're about to run out of time for Windows 7, so we have to make sure that we have a plan in place to migrate those, because once end of life happens for Windows 7, they're no longer going to get patches and they're going to become extremely vulnerable. Making sure that our databases are up to date. Make sure we have third-party patching on Microsoft products or Adobe products or things of that nature. So making sure that we're looking around at all of the vulnerabilities on all of our solutions, not just our servers, not just our workstations, and not just our firewalls and switches, but also making sure that the applications that we are using are also patched. Using antivirus, anti-malware, and then backups are really, really important. One of the big things about trying to recover from a ransomware attack is making sure that you have a really good, solid backup strategy. Now, are you checking those daily? Because oftentimes people will install those and then walk away. They don't think about them ever again. And you have to make sure that you're building a plan around checking to make sure that they are updated daily. One of the antivirus solutions that we offer to our clients, it updates about 5 or 6 times a day. And so it doesn't take but an hour or 2, maybe even 3 hours for it to actually be out of date, which is crazy.
Well, and with all the systems out there and all the cloud availability, people end up backing up their phones and their pictures and their music every single night. So why can't that translate into a business operation? If you're going to back up your personal phone, you might as well back up your business operation.
And think about that. How many people freak out about going to the Apple store to get a phone switch, and the only thing they're worried about is getting their pictures of their grandchildren or their kids?
Disney World.
If they thought that heavily about the business strategy, it'd be a completely different mindset.
It is the KISS method.
It is. Which is what?
Keep it simple.
Stupid.
Stupid. Or somebody.
Right. Internal compliance risk auditing. This is really important. I talked to you before about the amount of information that we found kind of hidden in little areas on the network, in the infrastructure. But if you have protected information or personally identifiable information, and it is unprotected on your infrastructure in your PCs that your organization owns, you are 100% liable. That's all the money that we were talking about earlier. That is a big part of that. And there's a fee, and it ranges, let's say 180 to 250 per line item for a social security number and things of that nature, just in a fine. That's not including the legal mitigations and having to send out a bunch of communication to those individuals. And in the healthcare industry, is it 500?
Regardless of whether the affected individuals are 500 or more or 500 or less, there are notification requirements in both regards. When it's 500 or more, those notification requirements are essentially stepped up in terms of both timing and the type of notice given. So regardless, you're going to have some notice requirements, but if it's 500 or more, you're really going to be placed in essentially a race to make sure that all notice is complied with, because you have a very limited amount of time in that instance.
Yeah. And don't forget that the notifications are mandatory. They are not going to be something that you can do if you want to or not do if you don't want to. They are mandatory. And also forget that during a incident analysis, the Department for Health and Human Services and its corresponding agency, the Office of Civil Rights, will actually take a look at when you provide a notification. And if you provide a notification after the requirement, you will also be assessed a fine and perhaps corrective action for your failure to timely notify, whether it's under 500 individuals or it's above 500 individuals. So it's absolutely critical that as soon as you suspect that there's been an incident, that you jump on it with not only with your IT group, but also you consult with your legal group, whether that be in-house, which is how many larger operations or larger businesses operate, or outside counsel.
Interesting. Thank you for that. You may have, or maybe you haven't heard of the SIM, which is an event log management. So are you tracking failed logins? Are you tracking changes in behavior around your network and your organization that can identify a potential issue, a breach of some sort? So if you can do it, it's really important to have some sort of SIM to manage your infrastructure in places that you can't see on a day-to-day basis on your own. And then penetration testing. So oftentimes people may get the two confused. There's a vulnerability testing on your firewall, but there's also penetration. A vulnerability test will just see what vulnerabilities are currently there. A penetration test is a far more sophisticated approach and a pretty more expensive approach even. But the intention there is to find the vulnerability and to ride that vein all the way through until they can get in, whether they find compromised credentials that actually work on your network, or they find holes in your firewall. That is a really important thing, that even if you're not required to from some sort of regulatory body to do that annually, regardless. And then having a security incident plan. It's amazing the amount of people that have no idea what to do in their organization when it comes to either getting a bad email or getting a call that they may have offered more information than they should have. But having a plan for if there is a breach or if there is an issue, where do I go to be able to handle this as quickly as possible and to stop as much of this as possible?
And I'll touch on this a little bit more later, but in certain jurisdictions, Kentucky being one of them, having written plan in place can actually give you a little more flexibility in terms of the type of notice that you provide to affected individuals. So not only is it important just from a general business perspective, but it can also help you out and essentially make things easier for you in the event a data breach does occur.
And let's not forget that as businesses evolve, people move in and out of different positions. Having a structured, identifiable, written plan will help enable not only current employees, but future employees adhere to the security incident plan, and also be able to ensure that there is a timely and effective response to when an incident does occur.
So the real question here, did you know that 70% of all data breaches in the small to medium business space come from an internal vulnerability? 70%. It's crazy, isn't it? So I'm going to go through this. This is a CNN Money video that was taking place. It's been a while back, but it shows in 2 minutes what a hacker can do. What you just saw there is just how easy it is for a hacker to be able to pick up a phone, act like someone else, get access to the help desk, have the help desk click on a link, and from that link, that hacker was able to take over that computer and literally watch every move that he was making. 80% of network intrusions actually come from compromised credentials. And then 76% of 76% of users use the same password for almost every website that they have access to. So if we're talking 80% of network intrusions are actually coming from a compromised, a stolen credential, then hackers can recognize that if I can steal your password from one account, there's a high likelihood that I can take that password and I can apply it to another account and potentially get in. It's mind-boggling the amount of passwords that actually are stolen every single day and people have no idea have been compromised.
Well, you know what? It'd be good not to complain when you get the little prompt to change your password every 90 days.
It really would. And honestly, that's a strategy. You should be changing your passwords no more than going 6 months out, 180 days, but at least every 6 months. The question that I oftentimes get is, well, how do people get their passwords compromised? And they come from multiple places, but generally speaking, they come from phishing emails. So you get an email that says, again, it's like the Amazon one. So you get an email and it says you need to change your password. You enter it in, it goes, no, that's not the right password. You enter it again, you keep entering it. But what you don't realize is that information is being shifted over to a database from a hacker, and he's sitting there just monitoring all of these email addresses and passwords coming in. There's a thing called malvertising. We talk about watering holes and web attacks, but really the big core to what credentials that are compromised come from is that email that you get that says you need to change your password, or your Office 365 account is about to expire. So you click the link, not paying attention to what the link actually is going to, and somebody has duplicated that exact site, and you enter them in, they get to steal them from you, then they get to use them against you.
Most people think their passwords are safe, but really, most passwords are dangerously predictable. Why is that? Well, most people begin with a standard password, something easy to remember. Maybe they replace a letter with a symbol, or add a capital letter. They might replace a letter with a number. Or, if they're feeling really creative, they'll add punctuation. What they don't realize is that in a matter of seconds, a hacker can crack that code and put you and your entire business at risk. How does this happen? Let's find out. Meet Sophie. Sophie's a teacher. Wait, she's a lawyer. No, Sophie's a dentist. She runs a busy practice and prides herself on keeping her patient data and business records safe. Between patients, Sophie takes a break and checks her social media account. She uses a variation of her standard password, the one she remembers because it's her daughter's name. Sometimes she makes the A capital, but this time she's using a symbol instead. Clever, Sophie. She doesn't know it, but she just opened a portal to the dark web. A criminal hacks her social media account and secures her exact password. Her credentials are auctioned to the highest bidder, who reverse engineers every possible variation of her standard password, exposing her bank account, employee information, and patient information. All of which puts her business at risk. But this disaster can be avoided. Introducing Dark Web ID. We scour the deepest corners of the dark web, constantly monitoring for your compromised credentials. And we alert you before compromise turns into catastrophe. Secure your business and protect your assets today with Dark Web ID.
All right, so what is this dark web? People talk about the dark web, but what really is it? Well, the internet itself is broken up into three big pictures. So we have the one at the top, which is 4%, about 4% of all of the internet. You can actually search by Google, Bing, or whatever it is your favorite search engine. 93% of that is what we call the deep web. The deep web is where maybe you have your own website and you have an admin console in your website. That's in the deep web. That's websites that you can get to, but you have to have some sort of login credential in order to get to it. And then below that is this small place called the dark web. This is where information is stolen and sold on a regular basis. A plethora of criminal activity falls down into the dark web where very few people want to go because just connecting to it is a huge risk. This is kind of what you might see, for example, looking for really crazy things, which I won't specifically speak out, but whether they're looking for an email hack or someone that can steal information, maybe here it says, I'm looking for someone that is selling possible database dumps from healthcare insurance providers, also completed HCFA 1500 forms will work. People are just looking for anything. And someone out there goes, I want to do that, and I can make some money off of it. So they'll do it. So what are some of the mitigations for social engineering? Number one is employee education. This is all-encompassing. This is a matter of what do I do with emails that I worry about? What about phone calls? What about, here's an example, USB drives. How do we handle USB drives in our organization?
Well, you really should limit the ability of your employees to utilize USB drives. One of the most telling stories about how social engineering works is Stuxnet, which was a joint Israeli and potential U.S. program, which actually put a virus on a USB drive, which was then somehow infiltrated into the Iranian nuclear program. And when somebody in that group, which was a closed intranet system, not open to the internet, it actually spun all these centrifuges and actually put the Iranian nuclear program back multiple years. And people think was one of the reasons why the Iranians came to the table so easily on the nuclear deal that President Obama structured.
Sure. So not only talking about employee education when it comes to the outside world, but also the inside world, and knowing what those risks include when I bring a thumb drive from my home. And people oftentimes think, well, if I can just put some AirNet in between my computer and everything else, if I can put a PC in the middle of a room and not connect it to anything, I'm safe forever. But the truth is, all you need is one thumb drive. You bring that in, plug it in, and it happens to have a virus, you've got problems, and you don't have to connect to anything. We also look at phishing testing. So phishing testing is a simulated process where you test your organization and your employees to see how at risk you are at clicking things that you shouldn't. So do you have a method for testing your staff for clicking on bad emails? Do you have a spam filter? What we see from our organization is about a 60 to 70% reduction in emails coming into your mailbox with a good spam filter. Not only is it safe, could you imagine the amount of time in your day that you get back from having 60 to 70% less emails? Web content filtering, just so happens you get one come through the spam filter because it's not perfect, right? But let's say it does. So you got this email come in and you think it looks legit and you got the spam filter, so now I even believe that it's a real email and I click it. Well, a web content filter will actually be able to minimize the impact potentially by recognizing that that's a bad website, and it will protect you from actually clicking. So it's one step further than having just a spam filter. You can also use this for other issues if you're trying to limit social media and things of that nature in your organization. But the key to, from our perspective, is keeping you safer than just a spam filter alone. And then dark web management. So do you know when your credentials for your organization have been compromised? We have seen in the hundreds, we have seen close to 1,000 for one organization that compromised credentials were put into really good websites. Like LinkedIn's been hacked and Discus has been hacked. These are legitimate websites. But the truth is, we go back to that 76% of people use the same passwords for everything. If I can hack your LinkedIn account and find out what your password is, I could probably try to get into your network from that same type of password and email address. So making sure that you know before someone else does, by managing the dark web through some sort of, we use the technology to do that, and then we let our organizations know when there's an issue and their email address pops up and that they've had a compromised credential. And then cybersecurity insurance, liability insurance. If there is an issue, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, but what do you do to protect your organization? Are you getting insured in a way that's actually something that needs to be done for your organization from not only a liability perspective, but also downtime? You've got data that you may lose. You have to deal with paying for like a year's worth of credit monitoring for every person that was in that issue. So there's a lot to it, and it's not enough just to get insurance, and it's not enough just to have cybersecurity protections. You really need both. And I do believe that at some point in the future, it's going to be a lot like healthcare, and they're going to grade you based on what you've been doing, what your activities have been from a cybersecurity perspective, and they're going to evaluate whether you are a risk or if you're not. And if you're at risk, they may not take a chance, or they may think you're like a low credit score, and they're going to raise your rates to a point to where you can't afford it.
And that's an interesting perspective that you have, that it's actually starting to be addressed by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, NAIC, which is essentially sort of the loosely governing body of all the insurance departments throughout the United States, something that they have been actively working on and is typically addressed at each of the NAIC meetings, which are about 3 to 4 times a year.
Oh, crazy. It's coming.
It's already here.
Well, true. So this is more for you guys.
Yeah. So it's sort of in addition to what we talked about earlier is that we have these 4 pillars. And I think that one of the things that everyone needs to understand is that cybersecurity begins with the employee. And one of the best examples that I've ever seen was, and I'm dating myself here, was back in 1990 and 1991. Everyone remembers Desert Storm, right? Norman Schwarzkopf, USA. Well, the air attack plans, which started off Desert Storm, were actually compromised at one point. In London, a RAF wing commander of the Royal Air Force had a wing commander who had a meeting with the Prime Minister, and he had one of the very first laptops in which they were discussing the air attack plans which kicked off Desert Storm. Well, the wing commander and his driver went to a London auto shop to take a look at some cars and actually left their vehicle unattended. Someone actually broke in and stole his bag, which contained the laptop, which had all of the plans for the air attack of Desert Storm. It actually was returned. The laptop was returned 3 weeks later, and in fact, none of the plans had been compromised. But that just goes to show you, even some of the most educated, sophisticated people can have lapses in judgment, which can expose not only you, but can expose your people in your corporation and can affect lives. So thinking about cybersecurity is absolutely critical from top to bottom. So one of the things that we want to touch on is that a lot of small and medium businesses involve healthcare type operations or entities. And this is also true for larger multi-billion-dollar national and international healthcare and pharmaceutical companies. Everyone has heard about what HIPAA and HITECH is, but what exactly is it? Well, HIPAA stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. And what HIPAA basically does is that it establishes federal privacy and security guidelines, which dictates when and how individuals' protected health information can be accessed, utilized, and restricted. Now, we could talk about hours about HIPAA, and there's some people here who are really excited about HIPAA. But what basically HIPAA does, HIPAA tells you, and it gives you definable guidelines as to how to establish administrative, technical, and physical safeguards in order to protect not only paper records, but also electronic PHI. Now, what is the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act? Well, everyone knows that as HITECH. And basically what HITECH is that HITECH expands on the ePHI security requirements and sets up governing rules. Now, this is all great because it gives healthcare organizations, people who deal with PHI, guidelines. But when you break those guidelines, there's two organizations that we previously mentioned, HHS, Department for Health and Human Services, and OCR, Office of Civil Rights. Those are the two entities that will essentially come in if there is a HIPAA incident, and they will investigate, they will determine the fine and or penalty, and it could potentially put you on a multi-year corrective action plan in which you have to adhere to certain requirements during restrictive timelines. So doing your work on the front end with cybersecurity, especially when it deals with protected health information, is absolutely critical. You don't want to have OCR and HHS in your building for up to 3 years or even longer than that.
Yeah, you definitely want that walk in the door.
Yeah.
The panic.
Well, and don't forget the effect on your operations and your reputation, as Chad will be talking about here, when it comes to notifying individuals of a breach.
Yeah, I mean, think about the fact that you should do this because it's the right thing to do. Like, it literally, cybersecurity is the right thing to do. HIPAA rules and regulations, it's the right thing to do. And so I spent 15 years in healthcare, IT, and I've sat in front of the CEO many, many times having conversations about things that he wanted to get accomplished that HIPAA said no. And unfortunately, the business impact is real, but it's there for a reason.
Yes, and what's even going to throw a bigger wrench into all of this is the implementation and growth of telehealth.
Very much so.
And as we begin to utilize telehealth, you know, your iPhone, my wife has been able to actually have an appointment over an iPad. I've done it. And as telehealth expands and grows and provides critical healthcare access to people in rural areas such as eastern and southern Kentucky, the need for secure telecommunications, secure firewalls is going to be even more paramount.
Definitely.
And so we've just spent a little time talking about the federal law governing healthcare entities with HIPAA and HITECH, but data breach notification laws apply across the spectrum, not just to healthcare related entities, but to any type of business. And while there's not any central federal law governing data breach notification for entities that are not covered by HIPAA and HITECH, every single state in the United States has enacted a law which governs data breach notification. In Kentucky, where each of our businesses are based, that notification is governed by KRS 365.732. That covers any non-encrypted, personally identifiable information, which is defined as a combination of somebody's first name or their first initial, their last name, and then either a social security number, a driver's license number, or a variety of financial information specifically enumerated within the statute. The big thing with Kentucky's law is it requires notice to affected individuals as soon as reasonably practicable. It's a bit of a loose standard that while you might think it could be helpful, oftentimes it can be just the opposite. When there's not a set standard defined, if you don't react quickly, you can find yourself in hot water even quicker. So really getting on top of that and jumping on it as soon as you find out about something is essential and very vital to keeping your business moving forward.
Definitely.
Digging into the nuts and bolts on notification to HIPAA and HITECH entities, we discussed earlier there were some differences between entities that have a breach affecting either fewer than 500 individuals or more than 500 individuals. For fewer than 500 individuals, essentially the notification has to be given 60 days after the close of the calendar year in which the breach occurred. So if you had a breach in January, you would have the entire year plus 60 days. Unfortunately, that amount of time is often needed by companies because they're not prepared. They haven't put in the proper implementations to have a plan in place when something like this happens. If you have a breach in December, you're in a lot more of a time crunch. And regardless, you're going to be in more of a time crunch if you have a breach with 500 or more individuals, because that requires notification within 60 days of discovery of the breach itself.
Can you identify more to this? Oftentimes we think about healthcare as being like that hospital or something else, but there's also this realm of business associates.
Sure. So these laws don't necessarily just apply to the healthcare providers themselves, but if you have an entity that houses its records off-site on a cloud storage or off-site server, that entity is required to maintain compliance with these regulations as well, required to enter what's called a business associates agreement with the healthcare entity that sets out their essentially their agreement to comply with these regulations. And they also have a notification responsibility. If they're housing these records and they have reason to believe a breach occurred, they have to immediately notify the actual healthcare entity for which they are housing the records, so that entity can take proper action and data breach notification.
Can they go all the way down to the individual level?
Yes.
So making sure that you're protected from a cybersecurity perspective is not just about that one level where you are, but it's anything that's associated with it, any company, supply chain wise, or anything else that has to do with that.
Custodians. Basically, if you operate a healthcare entity and you have third-party entities, corporations, doctors, experts coming in, it is absolutely critical to have a business associates agreement. Because as we will see, I believe on the next slide or two, it actually can play into fines that are associated when there is a breach.
Well, let's move on into it.
So for HIPAA cover entities, governmental fines can be both not only eye-opening, but absolutely devastating. So some of the examples of fines pulled from the HHS website show. One of them is Filefax it was a $100,000 fine. Now this was a company that ceased operations during the actual breach investigation. They shut down. But why I brought this up here was because HHS and OCR still require them to pay the fine even though the company shut down. So for all of you out there, your small business owners, even if you shut down, even if you declare that we are no longer doing operations, there is still, based on this precedent, the requirement that you have to pay the fine. So be very careful when you are investigating an incident and reporting the breach. You still will have responsibilities. We have one out of Florida where it was a group of doctors who shared PHI with an unknown vendor without a BAA. $500 fine. I bet that hit those doctors' pockets at the end of the year.
500,000.
500,000. Yes, it definitely would be. And look, out of Oregon, out of the Great Northwest, $2.7 million fine and a 3-year corrective action plan. What that $2.7 million doesn't show is the actual cost to the university of having to implement 3 years of corrective action. Talk about all the outside experts you have to pay. Talk about all the internal man hours lost. And basically, you would probably need to hire extra healthcare personnel to care for the patients because you have other healthcare personnel dealing with the corrective action plan. Just 2 more real quick examples. Cancer Care Group, $750,000 fine. Similar to my RAF example, someone stole a laptop and unencrypted backup. $750 fine exposing 55,000 patients' PHI. What this does not take into consideration, guys, is that this doesn't show any of the individual lawsuits that the Cancer Care Group was exposed to and whether or not they had a payout. And as we'll discuss later, potentially insurance may not cover that. And one of the last examples is St. Elizabeth Medical Center, sharing of documents via an internet-based application. If you're going to share PHI, if you're going to share data, make sure you do it over a secure website and or secure email. I really don't like sending PHI over email. I attempt to avoid it at all costs. Yep. But having a third-party website, so it's like a share file or something like that, where it is secured and you can restrict users' access is absolutely critical if there's a downstream incident.
Yeah, and there are plenty of solutions out there when it comes to sharing information to make sure that example for your email is getting an encrypted service.
Right.
So that you put a open box, encrypt, closed box in the subject line and automatically encrypts every email that comes out with that tag. So you don't have to worry about it and even almost make it out of habit, because the problem is you send so many emails that are not containing protected information that when you do, you forget to make the extra steps to make sure it was encrypted.
Now, one of the things that why I like a third-party website, like a share file, is because you can restrict the access. So you have to type in the email address to the person who's going to have access. They have to get the email, open, accept the conditions, and then they get the documents. And then that way you can absolutely control everything.
Yeah, it's true. And that's why it's really important that whoever it is that is your technology representative from an outsourced IT solution company or whatever, that they help you and guide you through these processes. There are so many options out there for backups that if you're not using an encrypted backup, period, even if you don't have protected information, you're putting yourself at a tremendous amount of risk. So always, always, always have encrypted backups, and always use encrypted emails when you're sending protected information.
Absolutely.
And so some of the numbers that Bill was just discussing are astounding just looking at them themselves, but that just captures governmental fines, as he mentioned. That doesn't begin to get into the world of civil liability. As I mentioned earlier, all 50 states have enacted data breach notification statutes, and many states afford a private right of action to their citizens when violation of that data breach statute has occurred. In Kentucky, residents have been permitted to file such actions. Right now, there's not much published law on the topic because Kentucky was actually, I believe, the 47th out of 50 states to enact data breach notification laws. So we were a little bit behind on that from a legislative perspective. But the law was enacted in 2015, and as I'm sure as more and more lawsuits begin to be filed based upon that statute, we're going to start to see published case law that shows substantial verdicts, civil verdicts, based upon unauthorized disclosure of information.
So some of the preventative measures that are essential to helping you out. The first one includes the establishment of a cybersecurity program, including policies and procedures. We have discussed ad nauseum today a security incident plan. And along with the security incident plan, you have to have policies and procedures that govern your cybersecurity operations in order to help prevent needing a security incident plan. So it's absolutely critical to establish, through whether it's internal IT or a combination of an internal IT operation and an external third-party IT expert, policies and procedures which outline an IT security, cybersecurity program that help you as an organization identify, stop, and react to cyber pirates.
And going right along with that, proper consultation with a cybersecurity IT expert goes a long way in, one, identifying the problem areas within your organization and then implementing preventative measures from a technical perspective to mitigate and minimize and reduce the risk associated with those problem areas. Likewise, talking with legal counsel about these issues can go a long way in both preventing and helping you manage when a data breach does occur. As Bill just talked about, having policies and procedures in place goes a long way, and appropriate consultation with a legal professional can help you make sure that you have policies and procedures that are effective. If you have policies and procedures in place that don't cover what you need them to cover, they don't give you a lot of help. So making sure that you essentially dot all of your I's and cross all your T's from that perspective goes a long way.
Well, and that plays an important role too in what cybersecurity insurance is. One of the things, as we were talking about earlier, is cybersecurity is one of the newest forms of insurance out there. And it's still this growing, budding field of how exactly are insurance companies, one, identifying the risk, two, actually insuring the risk, and three, what types of exclusions are becoming part of cybersecurity insurance policies out there. One of the things that you have to be absolutely careful about here is that some of the cybersecurity insurance policies actually have pretty standard, broad exclusions. Everyone takes a look at your auto insurance policy, right? And that's one of the things that I think is really critical here, is that we all have families, okay? And we all want our families to be insured as much as possible, because insurance is basically trying to find a way to protect from unknown risks which may occur. And when you go out and you get cybersecurity insurance, you have to be very careful, and you have to work almost hand in hand with not only your agent, but your legal counsel and your IT professionals to ensure that there are no exclusions, or that there are limited exclusions on the policies, because as you see up on the screen there, sometimes, like social engineering, it can be excluded from coverage. Now, can insurance also cover some of the governmental fines? That's something that may need to be in the policy that you got to take a look at. So there's a lot of different aspects. Cybersecurity insurance, it's this growing field. It gets touched on in every NAIC. You can go onto the NAIC website. You can take a look. Be careful. Be very, very careful with cybersecurity insurance.
It's not one flavor. It's not just because I got cybersecurity insurance, I'm good. I got to know my exclusions. I got to know what's not included.
Well, and
you need to get the right endorsements if the base policy does not include coverage for things that you need coverage for.
Well, and you also need to see how notification can be made. Is it claims or not? And furthermore, you have to be careful on the per incident and the aggregates. And another thing on insurance is you need to figure out whether or not umbrella insurance will also cover a cybersecurity incident.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, there was one incident where someone wired out $100,000 and then they tried to file that. It was a fraudulent request, but they wired the money anyway. So they went to their insurance and said, hey, we want to file the cybersecurity firm against our policy. And they said, there's nothing here. You gave it away. Well, what can we do with that? You gave it away. There was no ability under those circumstances to have an insurance policy that helped because they freely did something. And that's, I think, to me, it's even a higher level of concern when it comes to social engineering and making sure the employees are educated appropriately about what to do and make sure you have enough stops in between that individual and the delivery of money through wire transfers or something. That way there's enough checks and balances to cover.
Yeah, and I think that we will see a true rounding bout in the insurance industry once there is something like another Equifax or something like that where there actually is downstream large losses. Like everyone talks about hurricane insurance or flood insurance and how that affects the industry. Until there's a massive breach, which there is a downstream identifiable damages, like people start losing houses and stuff like that, then I think that there's sort of going to be we're testing the waters, and then something like that will actually help drive the industry.
Yeah, and along those lines, it's really important to not lose sight of the issue through the continuous stream of breaches that are happening. So it's really easy. Like there's a recent one that just came out about a bunch of information from home mortgages that literally just surfaced. We oftentimes don't think, well, that's not us, that's not us, that's not us. I don't ever go to these companies or whatever. And all of a sudden, you become desensitized to it, and one hits and you have no idea.
Exactly.
So it's being aware enough and keeping your eyes open to know if I have any business that I'm doing with this organization, or if this was 10 years worth of mortgages through some really big banks, it's a big deal.
There's some certain ways that we can help from a technology standpoint, including some of the things that you see here. Comprehensive email security, which includes advanced spam filtering, phishing testing, security awareness training, and dark web monitoring. Also, advanced managed cybersecurity solutions, where we'll manage patching, web filtering, antivirus, malware, auditing, 24/7 monitoring and email security, and also fully managed IT services, where we'll customize packages that will decrease risk while increasing revenues. Additionally, if you've made it this far in the presentation, if you're seeing this, you probably have some awareness or interest in being more proactive when it comes to protecting your organization and your people. So to be able to be more proactive, there are some tools out there that are a really big benefit to organizations. So we like to offer these from SimplifIT, and we will be glad to talk with anybody who wants to reach out about these special offers. The first is a complimentary dark web scan. So we'll provide this free of charge to anybody that sees this video, but you've got to know what's out there to be able to know how much risk you need to be planning for. The second offer is a complimentary strategic planning session where we will sit down and really draw a roadmap for your cybersecurity strategy and plan moving forward. Lastly, we'd like to provide a complimentary network and security assessment. This is a deep dive into your current network to identify risks that could lead to data breaches. We have some special offers available to those types of assessments as well. So just let us know if you would like to take advantage of those. Again, gentlemen, Craig, Bill, Chad, thank you so much for your expertise, your knowledge, but I think most importantly, your willingness to be able to help our viewers today. Thank you all for watching, and we'll be in touch.
This is advertising material.